Well, it's 10 a.m. on the East Coast. It's actually 4 p.m. in Normandy, France, where world leaders and veterans are marking the 80th anniversary of D-Day. There have been events taking place all morning long, and world leaders from across. Now actually now what we're seeing is President Zelenskyy being greeted by President Emmanuel Macron. This is actually quite significant. Zelenskyy was invited to this day of remembrance, and Vladimir Putin was not invited. In fact, there are no Russian representatives here today. It's significant because Russia was indeed an ally during World War II. In President Biden's speech earlier today, he pointed out the importance of a continued alliance to fight against tyranny, specifically identifying the war between Ukraine and Russia that is taking place now. Well, on June 6, 1944, Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy in what became a critical turning point in World War II. The massive military operation eventually led to the defeat of Nazi Germany nearly a year later. Earlier today, President Biden honored the sacrifice of the thousands of Allied troops killed on D-Day, and he reaffirmed the U.S.'s commitment to security in Europe. So I want to bring in Allport to talk a little bit more about today's ceremonies. He's a history professor at Syracuse University, and he was with me in the morning as the events of the day were unfolding, and I was very grateful to have you listening in. What do today's events mean to all of those who fought on D-Day and the war?
Well, it was very moving, wasn't it, to see those veterans of D-Day who are still alive, and there are, almost all of them now are around at least 100 years old. So there are very few receiving their decorations from President Macron. And this is probably the last time that any significant number of veterans will be able to attend one of the major ceremonies. So that was a very touching part of it. And I also thought that President Biden's speech, where he talked about the unbreakable unity of the Allies, was a very poignant moment too. I think one of the things that's important to get from the D-Day commemoration is that D-Day was not an American achievement any more than it was a British achievement or a Canadian achievement or anyone else. It was an Allied achievement. It couldn't, as President Biden said, it couldn't have been accomplished by any single country, and that was definitely the theme which he wanted to illustrate most strongly. And it's as a historian, it's certainly one that I think has an enormous amount of resonance.
And what's happening right now that the viewers are watching is world leaders and others are gathering at Omaha Beach. That was one of the beaches where American troops came ashore. I want to talk a little bit more about why D-Day was such a turning point for World War II. There was one front that was happening where Russia was fighting, and this opened up an entirely different new front and was pivotal. Now, we talk about D-Day as if it's sort of the end of the war, but it's really just the beginning of the end. It took another year for the war to end, but it really helped to turn things around. Why was that?
Yes, that's true. Although I should point out, of course, because many American troops also fought in Italy in the Italian campaign, so we shouldn't forget them today either. But it's clear that if you were going to ultimately defeat Nazi Germany, it was going to be necessary to land an Allied army on the shores of northwestern Europe somewhere. And this is something that had been planned for many years with a great deal of trepidation because they knew that it was going to be a formidable kind of task to accomplish. The Germans had swept all before them, it seemed, for many years in the early part of World War II, and they were very formidable opponents. So the fact that D-Day was accomplished with comparatively few casualties, certainly far fewer than had been feared initially, was one of the hallmarks of all of that careful planning. But, as you also say, there was a great deal of fighting still to come. D-Day was only the beginning of a campaign that was to last for another 8 months. And even the fighting in Normandy, just getting out of the Normandy beachhead, was going to take another 2 months. And there was extremely bitter fighting for the Americans, the British, the Canadians, and other Allied forces that were there in order to get out of that bocage hedgerow countryside and into the open country that they would need to get into in order to be able to ride on Paris. So D-Day is only one very small chapter, an important chapter, note to be sure, but a small chapter in a much bigger story.
And though it was obviously an incredibly challenging day, so many things had to go right because you had this major operation that had never been planned before and a small window to take advantage of it. They wanted this to be a surprise attack. They wanted to go in and be positioned under the cover of darkness, which meant that they were sort of doing a lot of this stuff by the light of the full moon, and the weather was not cooperating.
It was not cooperating, yes. If any of your viewers who have crossed the English Channel, even in the summer, will know that it can be very unpredictable and a very choppy body of water, even though it's quite small. And everything had to be aligned in the right way. They could only invade when the tides were in a certain way, when the moon was at a certain point, and also, crucially, when the weather was good. And at the beginning of June 1944, the weather turned unexpectedly poor. And right up to the final hours before then General Eisenhower ordered the attack to take place, it was still unclear whether they were going to be able to go ahead because they'd already had to postpone by 24 hours. They couldn't postpone for another 24 hours. If the attack did not happen on June 6th, they were going to have to push it back for several weeks, which would have had perhaps very, very important consequences for the way the war had gone. So it was a great gamble. And Eisenhower knew that he was taking an enormous risk with people's lives. He very famously, he wrote a letter on the night before D-Day, which he would have read out had the invasion been a failure, in which he took total responsibility for the decision to attack. And you can only imagine what must have been going through his mind in those hours when, of course, he did not know how the story was going to end, unlike us.
And just to let the viewers know, what you're seeing is President Emmanuel Macron greeting other world leaders as they come to Omaha Beach for another portion of the events taking place today. You would have seen a little bit earlier the Prime Minister of Canada, Pierre Trudeau. You would have also seen Prince William, that his wife, Catherine, who, as our viewers would know, has been dealing with a health issue, cancer, and has not been taking part in any public events. However, King Charles was also here earlier in the week, I believe yesterday, for other events. I want to talk a little bit about Eisenhower's decision to move forward with this, because not everyone in America was in favor of the U.S. getting involved in this war. Can we talk a little bit about the factors that ultimately led him to decide that the U.S. has to do this?
Sure. Well, the Americans and British had been involved in a very lively debate for several years after Pearl Harbor about exactly when and where any attack in northwestern Europe should come. There were disagreements about whether they should try it in 1942 or 1943. In the end, for various reasons, it had to be shelved until 1944. There were disagreements about where it should take place. Winston Churchill, the British Prime Minister, was very resistant to the idea of an attack against northern France. He strongly recommended attacking in southern Europe instead. And as we mentioned before, when it actually came to the late spring, early summer of 1944, there were only certain very narrow windows in which you could try an attack like this, and everything had to line up exactly right, and it sort of did, but just about, as it turned out. And that if things had gone wrong, there is no way that they could have attempted another invasion, certainly with any realistic time frame. And the blow to Allied morale, quite apart from anything else, would have been enormous had the thing failed after all this. So again, it must have taken enormous moral courage on the part of somebody like Eisenhower, who knew that if he made the wrong call on the night of 5th of June, then not only would his own career be in ruins, but he would have been directly responsible for the deaths of tens or even hundreds of thousands of Allied troops.
Indeed. Prince Albert of Monaco is who you're seeing walking in now. And this is taking place actually at Omaha Beach. And this leg of the ceremony, or this portion, is intended to really focus on the veterans, recalling their courage, their commitment, their sacrifice. And what we will hear later on will be testimonials, actual letters read, letters that the veterans wrote before D-Day, during, after the D-Day landings, to their loved ones back home about what it was that they were going through and why it was they were doing this. Professor, it's always sort of remarkable, and where there are increasingly fewer and fewer World War II veterans to talk to. But it's always remarkable to talk to them. One thing I'm always struck by is just how incredibly young many of them were. Many of them were teenagers. Their limited knowledge of exactly what they were kind of throwing themselves into, but their honest, sincere belief that whatever it was, it would be worth it because this would be the war to end all wars. I'm wondering what strikes you when you hear from veterans.
Yes, and I agree that so many of them were amazingly young. It seems, especially as one gets older, it becomes all the more poignant to realise that so many of these young men were barely out of their teens, and even junior officers were in their early 20s, having to take on this enormous responsibility for their own lives, the lives of soldiers around them. I think, like all young people, they went to war with a mixture of fear, curiosity, excitement. They didn't know what they were going to experience. They didn't know how they personally would respond when, if they were under fire. Would they have the courage within themselves to be able to hold out? I'm sure that as they sat in those landing craft on the morning of June 6th, awaiting to arrive at the beaches, and remember that very few of certainly of the American troops that landed on D-Day, very few of them had any combat experience. They were almost all straight out of training camps. They didn't know how that they would respond. Would they be able to do their duty? Would they or would they fail? The vast majority of them, of course, was successful. But it must have been as much as the fear of being killed or wounded must have loomed over them. I think there was also the fear of, how would they behave? Would they be able to, live up to the expectations of their buddies and their commanders? But one can only look back with a sense of astonishment and gratitude that so many of them were willing to take on these responsibilities.
Yeah, indeed, incredible gratitude. A number of them actually receiving one of the highest French honors. One of our correspondents, Elaine Cobb, described it as being knighted earlier today by the president. And a number of them still there, still on stage, and we're talking about people who are about 100 years old, and they've managed to kind of go through this whole day, which must be incredibly taxing. But we are very appreciative that they have been able to do that. Professor Alan Allport, thank you so much.